welcome to West Texas A&M University, and welcome to Panhandle International Business Forum. Tonight we welcome Mr. Eimon and Mr. Stuppi. Both are in international business, international trade experts. I will take a couple of minutes to introduce you to our newly formed Panhandle International Business Forum. It was formed in June 1993 thanks to Mr. Eimon and Mr. Stuppi, thanks to Mr. Luke Morrison and other people, and thanks to Mr. Bob Kelley. These people were very, very instrumental in forming this important group to encourage trade out of our Panhandle. It's a newly formed organization. It's an outgrowth of our International Week, which we had in 1993, a couple of months ago. It's a partner with Amarillo Public Library. It's a network of all the know-how and contact. The purpose of today's lecture is to make you familiar with international trade, to share some of the things with Mr. Eimon and Mr. Stuppi, and I believe you will enjoy our session. Why international trade and international business? People ask me why do we need to look at this area. Because I've been telling my students, and of course we had a couple of seminars in Amarillo, and most of you know that 20% of your national output is exported every year. 20%. It's a big number. Some of the companies you look at, about 60% of some of the companies' revenues are coming from other countries. And today we look at many countries where we have a global consumer convergence. We have economic boom happening in many, many countries. Some of the countries are Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, of course China, Eastern Europe, and today we have international economic convergence happening. It means more opportunities, it means more markets, it means more growth, and of course you have to capitalize on all these economic opportunities. So there are many opportunities available in today's world, and you have to understand what's happening today. And today, if you want to sell some product, you have to do your homework. So all these things we will share today. You also know what's happening in Mexico. You also know what's happening to NAFTA. You also know what's happening to the European Economic Community. You also know what's happening to Japan. These are all our future markets. So today I believe, and I believe you also agree with me, that students must be offered an opportunity to understand how business operates in this world. And I believe that we need to know more things about international business, because international business should be understood and explored. And that's why we have two speakers here. Let me introduce you to Mr. Eimon. He will be our first speaker. Mr. Eimon went to Stanford University. He had his BS, Bachelor of Science, in 1951 from University of California, Berkeley. Then he also went to Stanford University. He did his Master of Science in Geology and Business Administration, 1963. And Mr. Eimon is the Managing Principal of Minerals Evaluation Network. He is in Amarillo. He lives here. And Mr. Eimon also taught at New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology, and next month he will be one of the endowed chairs, the Schramm Endowed Chair in Economic Geology at University of Nebraska. So Mr. Eimon will be gone for 3 weeks, and he will be teaching at University of Nebraska. Let me read one of his statements, because I believe it's extremely relevant to international business. And I quote from his resume, 1992 Statement of Professional Concerns. The global market in minerals is not something to predict for the year 2000. It's here now. The global minerals market is dynamic, as constantly changing as is the political arena in which the market functions. If you apply his statement to international business, I think it's 100% accurate. The global arena, the international business, it's always changing. It's so dynamic. It's so exciting. It stimulates people. And that's why we are here to explore this topic, because it's one of the most important topics in today's world, and especially for our Panhandle, Texas. Please welcome Mr. Eimon.
to see you all here. I think I'm speaking to an audience with a wide range of interest, education, background, and international connections. If you're not now, many of you will be involved in international negotiations in the next century. How, when, and why are most fascinating questions. I don't know those answers. I look forward to seeing what each of you does in the international arena in the coming decades. Dr. Anwar kindly furnished me some material on international negotiations and marketing with some emphasis on Japan. Dr. Anwar is one of the more fascinating people I've met. He's a nut on information. When I ask him a question, he's got information about it anywhere in the world. But interestingly enough, his papers did not exactly fit my negotiations in international negotiating, nor do they replicate the comments by Richard Russell, the CEO of TechSpray, at the recent seminar that Dr. Anwar gave on international marketing. Nor will I believe I will duplicate what Norman Stuppi will say today. Why not? Because every situation in the international game is totally different. So today, I'm going to give you some personal principles of international negotiations, followed by personal experiences. The key element will always be adaptability. My assignments have always been as a mining exploration geologist or mineral economist, seeking information, evaluating mineral properties, or attempting to acquire a legal option on a property. Before I start the description of principles, I want to tell you when not to negotiate from two personal experiences. The first was in 1963 in a hotel in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, with my wife, the blonde, sitting back there. And we got in a pretty tight spot in a revolution that marked the end of the Alliance for Progress. And finally, we went to our room on the third floor. The hotel had a butane tank on top of our room. And in the middle of the crossfire of the revolution, a sniper hit that butane tank. Soldiers were entering the lobby. The hotel was on fire. So we decided we would try to escape. Went to the front door, and there was obviously machine gun fire there. So we decided to do the intelligent thing. We got sheets and tied an escape rope to go out the bathroom window, at which point a sniper saw us and took a couple shots at us. And my most famous quote of my life is the quote, before I did what I felt was necessary, i.e. crawl under the bed with my wife and wait to see what happened. And I told her, Pam, I promised you adventure, but this is ridiculous. That's no time to negotiate. The second time was no time to negotiate was when we were in Prague, Czechoslovakia in '68, and the Russian tanks moved into Wenceslas Square, and our hotel overlooked Wenceslas Square. We were proud of our room with the bay window overlooking the square. The second night we decided not to negotiate, but to escape to the back of the hotel until the shooting was over. Now for my principles of international negotiation. Principle number one, always number one, learn about the country and its people. Whenever you go to make a deal, learn as much as you can. Talk to knowledgeable people. There are people in this room that are the best sources of information. Students, businessmen, Dom Henschke on Australia. He's here for 1 year, tax expert from Australia. If you have that chance, that's where you start. You contact the U.S. government agencies, Department of Commerce, all the agencies that have information, and you use your library. Luke Morrison there at the Amarillo Public Library, or the West Texas A&M Library, a block away. You contact the consulates. Anything you can do to acquire as much information and understanding of the country to which you are going to negotiate. And especially if you can find an expert in your field. I was in Mongolia last year for the World Bank, and just a couple weeks ago, a man going to Mongolia came and spent 2 days with me. He said since he was only going to be in Mongolia for 2 weeks, he had to go to the right place at the right time and find the right people. So the expense of coming to Amarillo to talk to me was insignificant because he was spending several $1,000s on a trip to Mongolia. He would only be there 2 weeks. And if he sat in a hotel room for the first week, he lost half of his negotiating opportunities in Mongolia. Principle number 2, develop patience. Listen. We all enter a situation wanting to present something. Stop and listen. I do teaching and seminars in addition to my business. And it's always you want to pitch your story. You want to tell people something. No. Stop and listen. Ask questions. It will change what you say and do. Patience is a difficult thing. I worked in Nicaragua for ASARCO in the jungles of eastern Nicaragua in 1960. And I realized then, and have been working since then, on ideas I developed to explore for new mineral deposits in the jungles of Nicaragua. I've waited 33 years. It has not been time to negotiate till right now, as both Cuba and Nicaragua change, and there will be opportunities for all of us before the end of this century. Bolivia, I was there for the World Bank about 2 years ago. I learned patience in dealing with the Bolivians and learned to listen to what they had to say and what they want to do. And now as Bolivia comes full circle from the early mining development to nationalization, communism, and now back to a free enterprise system, they're looking for answers. But they don't want you to come and make demands. They want you to listen. They want you to be patient. Principle number 4, and a very powerful principle which few international businessmen take time to do, is educate with sensitivity. My first trip to Mongolia was 1991 with 2 colleagues to give the first workshop seminar ever given in the country of Mongolia. And the leaders of government were so anxious to learn that we wanted to have about 15 to 25 people. Well, they went to 25. They said, well, we'll take about 4 days. It was a seminar we were going to present. You ordinarily would expect you'd see the same people, but they changed every 4 hours. And it was tough to pick up. But the fact that we were willing to teach probably, I think, is the best way to negotiate. When you learn, you respect. When you respect, you set the scene for good negotiations. I was back for the World Bank then last year. One thing I did, and I did it without thinking very much, because of my visit in '91, I knew what the situation was for information in Mongolia. So I took some of my own money and part of my own library, I bought some more books, paid a lot of excess baggage, and took a small basic library on mineral economics and mining geology to Mongolia. I did it innocently. The fact that I did it, and I'm not taking credit for it, just keeps coming back to me. People keep saying to the Mongolians, said, the experts, the consultants, the people coming to negotiate, come, get information, leave, and never leave anything for us. They feel that most foreign aid is not really that. It's sort of a one-way street of experts coming and giving lectures or showing pictures or giving out something. But the fact that you left a library that we will use for mineral development turns out to be unusual and valuable. And I propose it as any one of you who get involved in international negotiations, make sure you leave something by which they felt it was a true exchange. In China, in 1980, where I participated in a business conference on mining, it's interesting that at that point in time, the Chinese were starting to launch their economic miracle. It's now occurred. And I thought how excellent was that they understood what education, communication was all about. The conference we went to on the Yellow Sea at Idaho was the big new conference center. And the conference center was built with a lecture hall surrounded by huge hallways. I thought it was an unusual waste of time. Then I saw the schedule of the conference. Paper was scheduled, and then there would be tea time. And there were the typical Chinese round tables surrounding. And we all went and then talked. And they understood and had built the conference center on the fact that the true way to negotiate, get information, is not just to talk, it's to get, not to listen, but to get together and discuss. Principle number 4, be yourself with no apologies. One thing does bother me a little bit on all the handbooks of negotiations is this is what you have to do and how you have to act and that type of thing. Yes, understand the culture of the country you're in, but for goodness sakes, be yourself. Take some boots from Amarillo. Say Amarillo. Take as many as you can. But when you're negotiating, just open up. Some countries of the world, people are very restrained. You don't have to be restrained. You're an open American. You're an unusual individual, and be that. Be sensitive, but be yourself. Last November, I was in Albania, where first look, you walk in, and here's a place that's been a prison for 50 years. The country's been a prison. Ocha makes Stalin look like a Sunday school teacher. You walk in there. How do you act differently? I said, I do the same thing I'm doing today. I wave my hands and talk about experiences and project my ideas. And in that case, because we were negotiating to sign options on mineral properties, we didn't know how to make contact. These people didn't know how to talk to Western mining people. They'd never met any. So after the Mongolian experience, I gave three-hour seminars and talked and listened. And after that, the floodgates opened. All of a sudden, the next day, there was a car, which was a rare thing in November of last year in Albania. I think there were 800 of them in a country of 2 million people at the beginning of 1992. There was a car to take us to mining properties. We hadn't even started to negotiate. they'd already figured out from the seminars, they liked the fact that we wanted to teach. And off we went to a copper mine, met with the manager, and said, I'll sell it to you personally. And in negotiation, you learn, you have to figure out what kind of authority the guy that you're dealing with has to buy the copper mine. He was all ready for sale. Principle number 5, communicate. If possible, learn the language. That sounds tough, but boy, my brother's lived his entire life in Japan. His kids are bicultural and bilingual. And his son raised $73 million for Stanford in Japan because he could communicate. In this case, not only in terms of language, but in terms of the culture. So when he went to see the chairman of Honda Motor Company, sure he was a big, tall American, but his Japanese was flawless. Now, if you can't learn the language, learn a few words. My wife is the great example. In fact, I just wait for her to tell me what are these various words. And that's magic, to say hello, and especially thank you or excuse me. Excuse me. I'm counting on her to learn 3 phrases in Nebraskan. If any of you know how to speak Nebraskan, I'm counting on. There's a guy. And this communication becomes important. 3-4 years ago, I was in northern Spain trying to investigate where the old Roman gold mines were on the north coast of Spain, operated by slaves, and they're all covered. That part of Spain is heavy vegetation. I went out with a geologist, and we just went in and we started to talk to farmers. And one by one, they led us to all those Roman gold mines. It was crucial to be able to talk to them, to negotiate, in that case, with the information on where the old Roman gold mines were. And all there were, they were just little humps, and in one case, we were able to enter one of the old mines. 6, which sounds maybe a little redundant, but don't forget your objective. Why are you there? What do you want to do? Sometimes things are so glamorous or interesting, or in the case of Czechoslovakia, kind of dangerous. But always remember why you're there. And in all your negotiations, you don't have to be ashamed or clever or anything like that. State your objective. Why you're there. Any games will always catch up with you. In Argentina, I was with the United Nations quite a few years ago, and the press took off after me because I'd worked for private U.S. mining companies prior to working on that assignment in the United Nations. And I said, should I cover this up? No. My assignment is to encourage private investment in copper mining in Argentina. So I got up in front of the newspaper, interviewers and radio, and said, this is why I'm here. This is why I work for the United Nations. This is what I want to do. There's no substitute for clearly remembering your objective and stating it clearly. Seek creative solutions. The revolution in Honduras lasted for 3 days. Second day was when all the shooting was concerned, but it was pretty dicey for 3 days. In the 3 days, most of the foreign businessmen in Honduras had left. I had a cable from Asarco saying, abandon everything, escape. And I looked around and said, gee, this is an opportunity. So I went to the head of the secret police and said, all the investors have gone. The president says we need investment. I'm a real live investor, but I need a carte blanche to go out and look at the geology of Honduras. I forget what the name is in Spanish. I needed a special paper. And he said, yes, we'll give you a paper. He said, so they took me over to somebody sitting in a typewriter. And he said, well, tell her what you want in the paper. So I wrote a magnificent document. Talk about powerful negotiation. When I was done, went back to the hotel room, said, gee, it wasn't official looking enough. So that document had postage stamps, U.S. postage stamps. I had a whole block of S&H green stamps. They were magnificent. And for the next several months, as I wandered through Honduras and went through a military checkpoint, I always handed it to the young soldier that was there upside down, so I could know whether he read or not, because most of them would look at it. And I would say whose name was the head of the secret police, and it was magic. And I went to, who was in Honduras? Pure Oil? Something like that, Pure Oil. And all their people had abandoned Honduras. So I went and there was this poor, pitiful, scared secretary. I showed her the paper and said, I understand I should have access to your area photography and maps, which are the most precious and confidential area. And so I sat at a table, something like this, and she would bring them into me for 2 days. And I figured, that's enough creative solution. I've got my information. I disappeared. Principle number 8, make friends. That's number 1. So much of our news is negative, but the whole world is becoming better friends. I see that in this room, those of you who've come from other countries to study here in West Texas. Those friendships are hopefully lasting things. And the fact that you've met people from other, they are your friends, makes you a better negotiator. I think my 20 minutes are up. I think we're going to have some questions after we hear about Norman and the Middle East and China.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eimon. Thank you for your thought-provoking ideas and insightful knowledge. We all enjoy your comments. It's great. One thing I forgot to mention, the other day I asked Mr. Eimon how many countries he has been to. He told me that he worked in 20 countries and he has visited 45 countries. But Mr. Stuppi broke Mr. Eimon's record yesterday night when I called Mr. Stuppi about his overseas visits. He told me that he lived in 4 countries and he has visited 75 countries. So I believe you need a big briefcase to carry on. Let me introduce you to Mr. Stuppi. Mr. Stuppi finished his Bachelor of Arts in Economics from University of Texas, Austin, 1967. His JD degree was from South Texas College of Law. Mr. Stuppi joined Christ and McMurray in 1974, and he was there for 4 years as an attorney. After that, he joined Phillips Petroleum from 1978 to 1988. He worked in various capacities as a negotiator, senior negotiator, executive representative, and then staff director, international negotiations. And when he left Phillips Petroleum, he was the senior landman special projects. He has gone to so many countries, he has dealt with so many countries as a negotiator, and I believe he has a lot more to offer. His 14 years experience in terms of interpreting laws, regulations, writing and analyzing political economic projects, especially political risk analysis, and he served as a company liaison with foreign governments, and he had seen a lot of countries as an international negotiator. Let's hear from Mr. Stuppi.
For the next 15 or 20 minutes, I just want to give you some food for thought here, so that perhaps we can have a better discussion during our question and answer session. It's nice to see so many young faces here. 20 years ago, I was in law school, and taking at that time one of the courses was corporate law. And this professor said to his class one evening, well, I'm going to dismiss class all of next week because I'm going to make a trip to London. And I thought, this sounds pretty good to me. And a few weeks later, he said, I'm going to dismiss class again for a few more days because I'm leaving for Paris for another business trip. Well, this really got my interest, and I thought, hey, this guy seems to lead a pretty nice lifestyle. I think, why can't I get into something like this? So when I graduated from law school, took the bar exam, had to wait 3 months to get the results for that, but I thought, well, I better get with it and try to get out and find a job. So I interviewed with various law firms, and I thought, boy, wouldn't it be great to be like that corporate attorney that taught in law school? Maybe instead of living in Houston, I could work in Geneva, Paris, London, something like this. I had high hopes at that time. Anyway, one of the law firms came back to reply and said, how would you like to live in the United Arab Emirates? Where in the world is that? Anyway, I got out of Atlas, and the United Arab Emirates is right here at the entrance of Persian Gulf, just next door to Oman. I spent 4 years out there from 1974 to 78. It was a terrific experience. Our law firm at that time represented anywhere from 14 to 18 international oil companies that were drilling offshore. Now, the Emirates consists of 7 individual Emirates out there. And we drilled oil in one of the Emirates, offshore. We drilled 2 wells. We got a very good gas discovery. But wouldn't you know it, with those 7 Emirates out there, the gas discovery did not stay within the border of our area. It wandered off into 2 more Emirates out there. So consequently, we had to get the sheikhs together out there to decide on how this gas would be split up among them. Well, that's another negotiation experience in itself. We more or less stayed out of that one. But to make a very long story short, the sheikhs were not able to agree. We had to abandon the wells and we left the country. It's too bad we left a lot of gas on the ground out there. And to my knowledge, no one else has ever come out to recover that gas. Of course, oil is what they're really looking for out there. Now, mind you, this was 1974 to 78 when the price of oil was nearly $40 a barrel. So obviously things have changed since then. After I left the Emirates, I thought, well, I really like this oil and gas business very much, and I'd like to get more of the corporate world. And they were hiring a lot of people at that time. So I got a job with Phillips Petroleum Company. And one of the places I lived on behalf of Phillips was in China. I lived in Beijing, China for 2 years. Prior to that, I lived in Hong Kong for 2 years. Now, in Hong Kong, I would commute back and forth. We opened up a back and forth to Beijing. We opened up a representative office in Beijing at that time, purely to keep track of what's going on with some bidding procedures that were going on in China at that time. So I lived part of that time, of course, in China, but it was the last 2 years that I actually lived full-time in Beijing. It was a wonderful experience. The negotiations there are a little different than what they were for the United Arab Emirates. The Arabs at that time, with the price of oil nearly $40 a barrel, couldn't spend enough money. They just had money pouring out of that country there. So they could be very arrogant. It was tough to deal with some of these people. The negotiations, though, were fairly simple. We would meet in one room, maybe a quarter of the size of this room right here. We had these meetings that lasted, well, the entire negotiations off and on went on for about 6 months before we signed a contract. Now, China is an entirely different situation. Here you've got a huge bureaucracy, bar none. The negotiations there went on for about a year and a half. There's a tremendous bureaucracy. We had various negotiators we had to deal with. The Chinese weren't so arrogant as the Arabs, but they really needed an education in what we were saying. So it goes back to what Paul was saying in his little speech, that obviously you have to communicate and you have to tactfully educate these people at the same time. But during this time also, I was writing political economic reports in these various countries that I lived in as to what's going on in the country. And many times, for instance, in the Emirates, there'd be a problem in another country. I would go to, let's say at that time, Beirut, which was very safe. It's a wonderful place to visit. But there might be a potential problem coming up in Lebanon. They want me to go in there and check and see what's going on politically and economically. So it was a fascinating experience about learning about various countries and also, of course, trying to do your negotiation work. But I would say the one area of the world right now that I think has got tremendous potential for international trade is Asia. And to give you just a good example of this, I got down here a little early this morning and I thought, well, I'll go to this Walmart store just north of your campus. Now just see how many items here are made in Asia. And I was amazed. When you walk in, there's a clothing section on the left-hand side. There are sports jackets, sweaters, and t-shirts and so forth. Well, here's a nice jacket made in Taiwan. Here's a nice sweater made in Malaysia. Here's a nice coat made in Korea. It's amazing how many items are made in Asia sent back to this country. I thought, well, maybe this is just the clothing. I better check some more. I went over to the radio section. And needless to say, nearly everything there from Japan or Taiwan. Even videotape for your VCR from Taiwan. I think there's a tremendous market there. But the thing I think that really impressed me was I went over to the sports section where the baseball caps are. And there was one cap that said Dallas Cowboys. I just knew this had to be made in Texas somewhere. Look on the label, made in South Korea. And so I think this is a lesson that we should be, that we should really pay attention to. The tremendous potential of that market. It is simply unbelievable. And a lot of U.S. companies are investing heavily over there. And I see a tremendous future over there for at least the next anywhere from 25 to 50 years. I'll leave the rest of my comments for any questions or answers you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stuppi. Before we go for the question and answer session, I would like to introduce you to some of our faculty from the College of Business. We have Dr. Jerry Miller, Dean of the College of Business. We have Dr. Stalifer. He's our Department Head, Management, Marketing, General Business. We have Dr. Suresh Gopalan. Okay. And then we have Professor David Summers. We have Professor Raju Ramakrishna from Department of Sociology. And let me see if I can call some more people. Dr. Chen. Chen is originally from Taiwan, and he's in the Department of Engineering and Technology. And I do appreciate, and Mr. Alidai, Dharam Alidai is from the Department of Mathematics. And then I would like to also introduce you to Mr. Bill William. He's our budget director. He's over there in the corner. Did I miss anybody in this room? Well, thank you very much, and let's open this floor for your questions. If you have any questions to our guests, please, you are most welcome.
Mr. Stuppi, I'm sure that there are differences in contract laws and all branches of business law in different countries. How one can get education in international business law?
How one can get an education in international business?
Not law education, but information about it, and how a person who is going as a lawyer into another country is getting information about business law in this country.
Okay. There are several ways to do that. First of all, as far as laws and regulations are concerned, here in the Texas Panhandle, you go to Texas Tech Law School. They've got a very good library there. They've also got a fairly good international section there, listed under various countries. Explain perhaps commercial codes and procedures. That would be one source of information. Another one would be contact with the embassy of the country that you're concerned with. A lot of the countries that are represented here in the United States. Obviously, the embassy representation at Washington, D.C., but many of these countries also have consulates in this country. For instance, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Houston, New York, Atlanta. And you can contact these offices and just say, I'm interested in how I can obtain more information about commercial law in country X, just to I would, like I said, the Texas Tech Law School for any legal regulations, and then just contact the embassy directly. That would be a good source of information.
And are there any law schools in the United States that specifically provide education in international business law?
In international business law? Not that I'm aware of. Primarily because normally your first 2 years of law school is general law. These are required courses you have to take. So your third year, you can start getting into elective type of law. I think what you might be interested in would be, let's say, an advanced law degree in international law. I would check out some of the Ivy League schools like Harvard Law, Yale. Perhaps also Bolt Hall, which is the law school at Berkeley, Calvert, since they have a tremendous amount of influence with Asia over there. Which just brings up one little thing. At Berkeley, right now, 60% of the student body are Asian. Now you would think, oh, well, this is great. All these people have a very good education and stay here and help our country. But that's not necessarily so. A lot of them are getting their education here in the United States and going right back to Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, whatever. Anything else I can help?
I think Georgetown University at Washington has a program, and I don't know whether it's graduate or undergraduate, specifically in international law. But I think the best thing would be to just go to your library, again, back to your library, and look through the directories of universities that they have, and just go through them one by one, and each of them then will, if they have a special degree or study in international law, it will be described. I know that this isn't USA, the University of Dundee in Scotland has an Institute of International Business Law with an emphasis, and the reason I know about it, in mining laws throughout, in mineral laws throughout the world. So I think if you're interested in that kind of degree, there are a number of schools that have specific disciplines in that. And the best way is to the library and to the directories of U.S. and international universities.
WT is a local university, and mostly educated students go to local business. How learning international business helps us? Can you explain a little bit how learning international business, how does it help our students when they want to get a job in the local area?
I think I look at his bibliography and ask him for some of the organizations and who to contact. I think gradually this school will get more of a reputation through Dr. Stollifer and Dr. Anwar, and will become known more. And I think it's going to be a good degree. But maybe I don't understand
Do we
the question.
have some businesses in this area which deals with international knowledge?
Straight Tech is an example. The grain export business is incredible. Maywood Door, there's a whole list of companies presently trading. Bob Balliet, the gentleman right there, is presently negotiating for aircraft contracts to retrofit, he can tell you the details, aircraft in China. And I think you'll find out through the entire Panhandle of Texas, more and more businesses are doing international trade. And I think here at West Texas, there should be more cooperation because of that practical experience being developed.
I would like to add a couple of points. There are so many grain companies in this area, and then Dextray and Amarillo beer, and all these companies, and of course your companies, India, they are trying to import from other countries. So you have a lot of companies in this area, 100-mile area, where they are selling to other countries, and not only selling, but they are also importing. So you do have a lot of opportunities, and one thing we always neglect, and that is many of our students, they go to Dallas, Houston. You will be surprised how many WT graduates are working in the Dallas area, and they are working for international companies. One of our undergraduate student, he was just hired by one of the Mexican companies. They already sent him to Guadalajara. He's dealing with all the trucking industry. So the basic thing, is you have to be bilingual, and that's your asset. If you are bilingual, you can buy your own thing, especially in today's world. As Mr. Eimon mentioned.
I'm going to hand you that U.S. News in the bottom there. I recommend you read this. It's on the same question. It's a U.S. News and World Report article about an aspect that many of us don't think about. I do because it's my business, on exporting know-how. And I had lunch yesterday with the petroleum engineers and geologists in Panhandle, Texas. And all of them are internationals. When the fires started in Kuwait, they were people from Amarillo that took that know-how and sold it. They're just as good as dollars that come back from know-how as it does in the green business. This is a fascinating little article. If you don't have access to it, if you give me a card or address, I'll see that you get a copy.
Two comments. One of them, the nice thing about exporting know-how is you can live wherever you want to. You can live in Paris, you can live in Aspen. You don't really need to have a big physical plant. You agree?
You want a central location. My last assignments have been in Mongolia, Albania, Quebec, and Bolivia. Amarillo is central.
The other comment in answer to your question is I gave a talk to the Panhandle Purchasing Managers Association several weeks ago, which consists of purchasing managers that often are CPM, Certified Purchasing Managers. So they're with companies like Phillips and Pantex and others. And I think there were about 35 people there, and I said, how many of you at this time are engaging in international business? And 6 hands went up, 6 out of 35 in that small group. And I think that what we don't realize is there, and these 4 fellows probably can tell us more than anything, but if you were to look over the roster of Amarillo businesses, I'll bet there's a pretty high percentage, some way or another, are involved in international business, in spite of what the natural perception is we're in a very isolated area. But we have excellent air service, for instance, here, both air freight as well as other travel.
Can we get Mary Blinderman to tell her straw story?
Well, I work for SPS in economic development, and I'm interviewing small manufacturers all over that Panhandle in South Plains of Texas, and there are lots of small companies that are exporting their products. A lot of them have to do with the agricultural machinery that we have in our area, and we're even talking about cottage industry. So the story I like to tell about the cottage industry is the 2 ladies down in Silverton, Texas, who formed a company last year called Caprock Floral Ranch, and they grew up in the Silverton area on ranches, and this noxious weed, which the ranchers hate, called broomweed. Some of you may have it in dry floral arrangements in your homes because it's for sale. It's in demand. It's in demand in this country and overseas. Last year they started collecting it, and they have a couple of containers loads right now. And a fellow in another part of the Panhandle was actually exporting it. He ran out of his supply, so he contacted them, and they in turn supplied to him. So they were already indirectly exporting it last year. Well, I'm linked to the Texas Marketplace, which is a program through the Texas Department of Commerce, and it's a buyer and supplier matchmaking system, and on it are international trade leads, so the Texas companies who access it can pick up trade leads from all over the world. Well, there was a lead on there from a start faxing to each other. They did. They sent some sample, they liked the sample, and the negotiation, I can't come and tell you there's a success story yet. The wholesale florist person I've talked to personally, he's going to make a trip to this area in August to personally see the broom weed and to visit with these people. He's gotten very busy, and I talked to him on the phone recently. He said he was still planning to come. He had to postpone his trip. He was planning to come around this time of the year, and he let me know. So it's still open, and the deal might take place, and I think that's really exciting. But here's two people who are making an opportunity. I guess you'd say they're making lemonade out of lemons or weed out of a product that we would never dream could go overseas. But it will, and it has indirectly, and if it goes through, a container load of broom from the Panhandle of Texas will go into England.
Bob,
So,
would you like to tell us your case study about exporting to China?
First of all, let me explain what trade wind turbines is. It's a retrofitting operation based at Trade Wind Airport in Amarillo, which converts single-engine Beechcraft aircraft from the original piston engine over to a turboprop engine produced by Allison. This is a very expensive operation. Each aircraft can run anywhere from 350,000 up to $1 million or better. My wife and I have traveled extensively all over the world, and I became interested in China last year when we spent about 3 weeks from Shanghai clear up to Beijing. And when we come back, I was acquainted with Trade Wind turbines and discussed it with them, and ended up as handling their international sales. There is a Chinese group, a very large group of Chinese in Denver. They have a trade association up there, and in a very roundabout way, Paul Allen, by the way, I was able to contact these people, and as an upshot, back in July, we spent some time in Denver discussing these aircraft with them. One of their representatives flew to Beijing about a month later, and we are now negotiating with the Chinese government to possibly supply these aircraft to China. The reasons, the aircraft that we are working on out here is very versatile. It can get in and out of very short runways, rough runways, but it can also use fuel that ranges from Jet A, clear down to diesel fuel, kerosene, automotive leaded gasoline. And this is crucial because aviation fuel, aviation gasoline, is not too available in these portions of the country or the world. We just finished a contract or negotiations for a contract with the Indonesian government out of Jakarta and a few other places to supply 16 of these aircraft. The contracts will be late in November for civil aviation training in the Indonesian area. There's civil aviation people over there. One big thing you really need in this business is a fax machine. You can't live without fax. So buy fax, do what Paul says. Above all, become friendly with them, learn a little bit about them, be yourself. Trade Winds Turbines is going to produce probably $20 million worth the income to the area in the next 12, 15 months. I'm very proud to be part of it. And you can do the same thing. It's just a matter of getting out, working at it, studying, traveling a little bit if you possibly can, and enjoy it. Paul had trouble in several places. 5 years ago, my wife and I were in Lima, Peru, and we had to negotiate ourselves out of the airport in Lima, Peru with American dollars. And it wasn't with the airline, it was with the guys holding the machine guns. So this happens, and it's just part of the excitement. You do have a bit of apprehension, but don't be scared. It usually work out very well. Thank you.
I'd like to know how Mr. Stuppi views the political economic environment in the Middle East now, the changes that are taking place in the past 2 weeks.
Very delicate. I think it'll be a long time before you're really going to have peace with the Israelis and Israel. Several reasons for this. This has been going on for years and years and years. Despite the so-called peace agreement that was signed the other day, the majority of that speaks to the Gaza Strip, which is simply a worthless piece of land. It's like the Mojave Desert. So that's no big deal to relinquish that. And then Jericho in the West Bank area is just a desert town, right? It's no big deal to relinquish that. But at least it's a start. And I give them credit for at least the start. But I think you're going to see, especially in the next few months anyway, a lot of small acts of terrorism over there. Some car bombings, some machine gun firing. And I'm sure Mr. Arafat has got to be very, very careful over there. He better have a pretty good bodyguard with him. You have extremist groups on both sides. The Arabs, for instance, have several groups. One is Hamas, one is Hezbollah. They are very, very powerful terrorist groups. One should be extremely cautious of them. In no way did they want this peace agreement signed, and they're going to do their uttermost to make sure that it does not stick. And of course, the Israelis have got the same type of thinking on their side too. So I see a lot of problems out there. I would not want to start a business out in that area right now. But I hope it's solved within our lifetime. But that's a big hope, I think.
What about nations like Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon who have been supporting this Palestinian population?
I see this same problem there. You got to remember, like Syria, for instance. You've got a man that is the president of Syria, Hafez Assad, who is perhaps at least on the same plane as Saddam Hussein. He's extremely dangerous. Lebanon is still just a can of worms. It's essentially still controlled by Syria at this stage. Jordan, they're sitting right next to the West Bank. They have a ruler now, King Hussein, who has got a terrible medical problem. I don't know how long he'll be in there. His brother will probably replace him, who's a fairly good leader. But it's a tightrope situation in there. If I were going to invest in the Middle East, I would go further down the Gulf, what we call the Gulf states. This would be like Bahrain and the Emirates and Oman. For instance, the Emirates, this is where Abu Dhabi and Dubai are located. Dubai has one of the greatest free ports in the world. It's an excellent source of trade. Dubai and Hong Kong, in my mind, that's where you see the free market system at its very best. And the Emirates right now, one of their big imports is food. This is a country that is simply right out of Lawrence of Arabia, nothing but desert out there. Their primary product, of course, is oil. And they also export, I think, dried fish and palm dates, but that's it. But they import practically everything else. I think it's a great source of trade. But I wouldn't even think at this stage of trying to get anything started up around what I call the northern part of the Middle East, Syria, Lebanon, or in Israel. I think it's just a little dangerous situation right now. This is one thing I think you should be aware of, and that is before you start in on this trade and thinking about international business, or what are the political implications of all of this? Suppose you had a small joint venture right now in Russia. How safe would you think that? Suppose you had something in Haiti. How safe is that? Or even in Syed's country, Pakistan. They're going under tremendous political change right now. It's a very shaky situation. You have got to think these things through. You're not necessarily going to get this information from Time or Newsweek or even CNN. You're going to have to go to outside sources to get this. A great source, I hate to just deviate for just a little bit here, is the State Department. Now they have a duty officer for all the countries that the U.S. has representation in. And you can call these people up, they're generally right out of that particular embassy, and they're waiting to transfer somewhere else. So they have fresh information about what's going on in that country. I think that's an excellent source of information. And of course, just use your own judgment too. Well, I see that prospects in Latin America now are a little better than what they were. They're more or less, the military governments are more or less gone, and now you're having civilian governments that seem to be doing okay over there. So a lot of it's just common sense too, but you will never know when that surprise might occur, and you've got some money invested in one of those countries. So just use common sense and good luck.
I'd like to add something. If you're really interested in finding out about the Middle East, Dr. Syed down here at West Texas State is putting together a group of 5 panelists on the Middle East. And on October 14th, 7 p.m. at the Amarillo Public Library downtown, we're going to have that forum and discussing the PLO, Israel, and so forth, and what the future holds for the Middle East.
I'd like to make one interesting comment. Norman was talking about Jordan. My wife and I are leaving October 29th for a trip through Egypt, and we're going to Jordan and other places. We were told that if we had an Israeli stamp on our passport, that we would not be able to get into Jordan. So it's very interesting how the political climate works actually. Fortunately, we have not been to Israel.
Let me just add something to that. When I was out in the Middle East, there were many U.S. businessmen that came out there that had 2 passports. One for Israel and one for the rest of the world. Because you could go over to Israel and get that passport stamped Tel Aviv International Airport there. But don't try to take that passport back into Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, or Abu Dhabi, or any other Arab capital. And that immigration officer sees that Israeli stamp on there, you just get back on that plane. So they carried 2 passports. And I think that still goes on in this day.
Yes.
I'd like to address an earlier comment about the need for knowledge of international business because of the number of students in here. They might wonder why we teach these courses or we teach parts of them. Well, for one thing, we had Career Day last week, and a lot of students getting ready to graduate came back saying there's not that many jobs available, or they have to start at lower level clerical positions to take advantage of working up to utilize their degree. They're here to get a better job. There may not be that many jobs in the area, whether they're globally affiliated or not, but we are in a global economy, and I think just opening the students' minds to the fact that they can get jobs overseas and just have them thinking about that opportunity is valuable, and that's a reason for teaching international aspects of business.
Thank you very much. In fact, I apologize, I did not introduce our new professor, Professor Jones Riviera. My apologies. She's our new faculty member in the Department of Management, Marketing, and General Business. Very valid comment. Thank you.
I think, Anwar, one thing we might mention, because we do have a number of people here that may not be aware that due to your efforts starting about 2 years ago now, we have taken in our department and we have structured, Dr. Anwar has a major in general business that focuses upon international business. If you are not aware of that, including you students, you might visit with Dr. Anwar. From the point of view of the guests who are here from outside the university, I wanted to make you as well aware that we are starting to focus much more strongly on the international area, primarily through Dr. Anwar's efforts. But we do recommend if a student goes that route, take a foreign language as a part of their preparation. And I think that the future for those students, going back to what Joan has said, is going to be much, much greater. If you can speak a language, if you can have some cultural sensitivity to different parts of the world, you'll make yourself significantly more marketable in a tight job market. And I think you really need to consider that.
Since you brought up the issue of cultural sensitivity, because it certainly reminded me of what you had said and what social responsibility of big businesses ought to be when they go to international third world countries. Like you said something about it, and it's not a criticism of what you had said, but it's more I want your opinion on that. I want the rest of the business community and what social responsibility. You use the SNS free stamp to fool some people. And obviously work, and maybe for a short period of time. But that many, many times leaves the impression of the ugly American. We read about that book, if you're not, I think it's a very interesting book. How the Americans have gone to third world countries or other world countries and taught those people to be really dumb idiots who can be very fool. That's how he got the name of the American. And so that raises the question of business ethics. Is there anything called business ethics? Is there any course taught like business ethics? Or is there any ethics? Or is it an oxymoron? Maybe you want to answer that.
We have a course in Management 411 that deals with business ethics and society. I can tell you this, that in virtually every one of our courses practically now that we're teaching, I think both in management and marketing, and if you pick up a typical text in the area, you will feel a little synopsis of ethical incidents, for instance. And I'm teaching the graduate leveling class now in marketing, and the interesting thing I found in that is more of these little synopses that they have deal with international business ethics. And I would certainly hope that business ethics is not an oxymoron, because quite frankly, we, I think, in our department at least, come on very strongly with the idea from a marketing perspective that if you have to take advantage of people in order to achieve profitability, whether it's polluting the environment or whatever, you need to ask yourself the very hard question, should I be in business? And I think more and more firms are asking that question today. And of course, I personally think that's the right route to go.
That's a new, would you say that's a new development?
Last 10 years.
I'd like to add one thing to that. The same group, the Panhandle International Business Forum, on the December 1st meeting, that's Wednesday at 4 p.m. at the Amarillo Public Library. The topic is going to be cross-cultural ethics and international exchanges, and that's going to be given by Dr. Matt Collins.
I think there's a general overall improvement in the ethics of international business. The past is not a very good thing, and corruption is insidious and exists throughout the world. And it is not just sponsored by the international corporations or an individual doing business. It's a tough thing to fight, and I think the business community and the business schools, or universities in general, realizes what a serious problem it is. Very negative in terms of business development. But it pops up, and this seminar is about international negotiating. And we could have another 4-hour session about all the ramifications of business, corruption, honesty, and what various individuals or companies do, have to do, can't do. And it's a difficult problem, and I think that problem will exist with us forever as a human being. American companies, and I worked for them, especially the early part of my career in mining in Latin America, for instance, were not, the standards were how do you have to do business, I was in the office when we paid $250,000 personal check to Anastasia Somoza in Nicaragua, the first of every year. That was sort of your fee to do business. To give him a check that he could put in a bank in Switzerland or the United States. And then you have to decide whether you do that, whether you're going to stay in business. And all sorts of decisions are being made every day about that right now. I think L.L. Bean made the statement last week, they're not going to do business in China anymore. That was theoretically a business ethical decision. I question whether they really studied it or they just their image out of Maine with American products, they chose to take this time to make that kind of statement. That whole Chinese Tiananmen Square trade is a measure of ethics, standards, human rights, the environment, NAFTA, difficult area.
I think Bob kind of hit it a little bit ago when he said he had to bribe the guy with the machine gun at the airport. I think, for instance, that there is a tendency to look at American business, and I'm saying this for the benefit of the students, I guess, too, that we are large corporations, terribly unethical. It's really my feeling that you ain't seen nothing yet till you get overseas in terms of bribery and so on that is necessary to do business. And I guess I would simply like to say that as far as some of our classes, we talk about moral and ethical dilemmas that you're going to face in doing business in America. Those of you who are going to be doing business in the international realm, I suspect, because of different cultural nuances as to what's acceptable behavior, bribery, whatever it is, you're going to be faced with even more difficult decisions, I think, along that.
That's exactly right. The Indonesian deal I was talking about before is working through an intermediary out of Memphis, Tennessee, who was handling just those problems with big Indonesia. Eimon ran into a problem in Beijing about a year ago when she was going to Mongolia to be with Paul, and I think it cost you $300 for a little visa problem you had in Beijing. $400 in Beijing. See, so we're not just talking the ugly American. We're talking what we're seeing out there in the other parts of the world where we are restricted by law in the United States from doing these things, and yet the other countries, or not the countries, the people we're dealing with over there are requiring this. So it's a very touchy thing, very, very difficult. The ugly American is one thing, and I agree with you on that, definitely. And I see it out there in airports, and I see it in restaurants all over the world. But I also see things like Penn ran into, things like we ran into in Lima, Peru, where this guy with a machine gun, before he lit up beside the ramp, put his hand out and put a old $20 bill on it, walked off. See. This happens. This is the way it is. And like the doctor said, not too sure how we're going to be able to approach it or how we're going to be able to work it out. But a lot of international people doing business, like ourselves, Pickens turbines, very small, are having to go through intermediaries, and we don't want to know what they're doing. We sell the aircraft to the intermediary, he sells it to the other country. Thank you.
Yes.
I'd like to end this on a real high note and ask Dom Hinchke if, when we come to the Olympics in Melbourne, Sydney, in Sydney, are you going to welcome us, or what do we need to know about Sydney?
Well, it's a 15-hour drive from Adelaide, so it's not recommended for overnight accommodation for me. The TV you'll get in Adelaide will be just as good as you get here, but I'm certainly be pleased to see any of my friends from Amarillo in, 7 years' time. Yes. Yeah, you've thrown that over me. I had a question. I had been to a negotiation skills conference in Australia a couple of years ago, and I was wondering if perhaps, Mr. Stuppi, you would like to elaborate more on some of the negotiations you've been in. What sort of preparation do you go to? The example given to me was a Australian iron ore producers dealing with Japanese mills that steel mills are looking to buy their raw product. These particular the producers go into I think the most successful session negotiation they ever did was they had about a 2-week seminar training course or workshop where they actually, okay, today we're the Japanese and today, you're the Australian. How are you going to stop us getting the price that we want? This sort of thing. Have you ever done that sort of thing in your travels and work? And is it something that is widely done? Or are you just talking about a particularly hard enough to crack in the Japanese?
I think the Japanese could be very difficult to negotiate with. I have had no experience negotiating with the Japanese, but the stories I hear about them, I'm glad I don't have that experience. You have to remember when you're negotiating, first off, who holds the ace cards to this thing? In other words, who's coming to whom on this? Let's say China has got a market you're interested in. Okay, in this case, China holds the ace cards. They're on top of this negotiation. So obviously, you've got to make your moves in sync with them on this. I think a lot of this, I've heard all these rules and regulations about negotiations and this kind of thing. And I know it's important, obviously, to learn the culture of the countries and things. But a lot of it just boils down to plain etiquette and common sense. You don't go in there trying to think that you own the world and this kind of thing, and boy, I've got a better lifestyle than you do, and you better listen to me and this kind of thing. No. And yet you shouldn't go in there like Willie Milquetoast either. But I think a lot of it just boils down to just being a nice person, trying to understand them, being yourself. That's what that really comes down to. Any words of advice, I would say certainly, and here again, just common sense, do your homework about this country. Try to learn a few words. It's amazing what little words like thank you and hello can mean. Their eyes brighten up completely when you say this kind of thing. If you're fluent, all the better. But certainly learn just a few words there. I've got a funny story I'd like to tell you, just 30 seconds here, in the Middle East. I had to give briefing reports to the sheikh I was dealing with every day on the status of our oil well offshore. And when it came down to really the test and evaluation stage, we brought in our drilling manager on the rig. And he was a typical stereotype drilling manager. Big pot belly, Texas hat. I don't think he had any education beyond the 6th grade. And sort of a George Patton out there on the drilling rig. He wasn't, I'd say, your Henry Kissinger as far as diplomacy and this kind of thing. So I had to brief him on that. And by the way, this fellow's name is Wayne Gifford. His brother is Frank Gifford, who does the Monday Night Football forecast. But they do not look anything alike. I would say Wayne is probably at least 200 pounds heavier than Frank. But anyway, I was briefing Wayne about this sheikh, and I said, now listen, his name is Sheikh Sultan, and we'll just go in and we're going to shake hands, and we're going to just give you, and I want you to tell him in as simple terms as possible the status of our well down here before we start to test this well. Went over all of this with, I said, just remember that name Sultan. When we're going out there in the taxi to this place, oh, he said, Sultan. And so finally we got out there. He said, Norman, I don't even think I can remember that name Sultan. And I said, okay. I said, there's another way to address these sheikhs out of this particular part of the world. And that is, say, Your Highness. I don't think you're in Buckingham Palace or anything. Just say, Your Highness. That's another one. You can remember that easily. So Wayne gets in there, and we sit down, and the first thing he says is, Your Holiness. Well, this particular sheikh really had a Western frame of mind. And so he laughed at that. And that went over real well with this sheikh, because he always asked me, he says, when are we going to have Mr. Gifford in here? I want to be addressed as Your Holiness. And So that went over well. But there are some cases where that could really be a disaster. People could take that the wrong way. I hope this answers your question somehow.
I have one comment on job opportunities. Job opportunities in the future are to find a need and fill it. And I was at lunch with a fellow who had just been a lawyer here in town, given an assignment to figure out what the market for veterinarian medicine was and veterinarian services in Mexico. And a lot of us, some people are apologetic to Panhandle of Texas. It is the world center and will become the world center for veterinarian medicine and veterinarian services. If you want a job, if you'll learn about international negotiations, marketing, and veterinarian medicine and veterinarian medicine services, get that all together and then watch that industry grow in the Panhandle of Texas, there's a job there.
You know, that I don't think that's their opinion about NAFTA.
My opinion or
Their opinion. If there is not enough NAFTA,
would you like to talk?
Do you want to start?
Sure.
Yeah.
I've got mixed emotions about it. I'm generally in favor of it, but I think it's going to be bogged down with too many rules and regulations and things. I'd like to see it more open. When they say free trade, I'd like to see it like what Hong Kong and Dubai and stuff, without all these regulations. I'm all for the free market system. I'd hate to see tariffs and duties and this kind of thing. Let's face it, one reason American cars are a lot better right now is because of the Japanese competition. And that brought on General Motors, Chrysler, and Ford to improve the quality of their product. I'm all for the competition. I'd hate to see we could only bring in 300,000 Toyotas a year type thing. I'm saying let them bring in as many as they want and let the market determine. That's what I'm in favor of. I think NAFTA leads toward this, but I'm afraid there are going to be too many rules and regulations to interfere in this.
I don't even bother thinking about NAFTA. I'm a free trader by nature. I don't think it's going to make that much difference. I think we're going to have the trade with Mexico and with Canada. I think the impediments that come in will be maybe problems, negotiation at that, but it's logical that our trade with Mexico just goes straight up. Our trade with the world will. And all the people discussing this, I don't think it will make that much difference. I think the veterinarian pharmaceutical industry of the Panhandle of Texas is going to go into the Mexican market, and it's going to be a very good business. I think it's going to be unfortunate that if we don't have NAFTA, it's going to be harder for them to do it, but it's not going to stop.
Anwar, we're about out of time, but we've got a lot of students. I'd like to pose one question to both gentlemen, and that is, as a student, what would they suggest that they ought to be doing in order to get themselves ready for this global market? We've alluded to some of this, but I'd like to have each of you very quickly address that.
I would say take as many courses as you can that deal with the international concept, be it government, history, business, law. Get as much education as you can in this. Also, try to become fluent in a foreign language. That's not necessarily a requirement, but it sure helps when you're living overseas. And I think there's a tremendous future. I just wish I could be in the shoes of these students here with the opportunity they've got now as far as international business. When I was in university, it was in the mid-60s, and I think the only international business course in Texas at that time was a graduate seminar or something. So I would say take as many international courses as you can and study hard and do your very best and just a little bit.
I'd recommend that you do a research project in one of your classes of what you want to do in an area where there's economic growth. Work on it very hard and prepare a 5 to 20-page report that you can take to a company and say, here's what you need to do, here's how I can help you do it. That's different than submitting a standard resume. And I hope the professors here would cooperate with you in letting you do that kind of research, even if you don't get this dream job in the industry. You find the discipline of how to figure out of solving a problem, filling a demand, finding a niche market is good discipline, good learning.
Excellent.
I had one thing to that. Study world geography. If you don't know where the place is, you can't do business.
Well, I think we are running out of time. On behalf of West Texas A&M University, we thank Mr. Eimon and Mr. Stuppi, and I also thank you for your participation. Let's give a hand to our guests.